So I first met the composer and pianist William Goldstein last week at a class he gave, and I realised really within the first couple of minutes that I had to get him on our classical cafe. Luckily, when I asked him, though, he agreed, so we caught up for brunch and had a good old chat. So, Bill, you're a pianist, a film composer, and also an instant composer. In fact, for a long time there, you were actually a disco artist. I think it's fair to say at this point in your rather illustrious career that the big thing for you now is this thing called instant composition. And now when people talk about improvisation, it normally brings to mind a certain jazz style or jazz setting, but you draw a very distinct line between the idea of jazz impro and, well, what you do. So how do you draw the line, and where is it exactly?
Well, I don't know that there's a line, but I think there's a... when people think of improvisation, they think of jazz improvisation because that's what they're exposed to. And I'm going to go back and answer something that perhaps a question you almost implied, which was, why was I not involved in instant composition all along? It's because it was a gift that always was there, but I didn't really think anybody cared about it. I didn't think it was important. It was just kind of something I did, like I sneezed often or something, But I was working as a composer, and yes, it aided me. I was able to do things rather quickly sometimes, but I didn't really think anybody cared. So I didn't get around to putting my first collection of instant compositions together and releasing them until 1999. But getting back to the more specific question of the difference between improvisation and instant composition, well, instant composition is improvised. However, improvisations in the jazz world are almost always built around existent compositions. So you have a melody and rhythm and harmonic structure in which the improviser improvises around. Instant composition is starting from scratch and developing the form and the content and everything out of nowhere. And I demonstrate this when I do recitals, concerts, in different ways. The easiest way is to have somebody from the audience come up and pick 3 random pitches on the piano, and then I take those 3 random pitches and create a piece. I've also been improvising dances and ballets with dancers. I was at the Transatlantic International Music and Film Festival last summer in Poznan, Poland, where I worked with dancers from the Polish Dance Theater, and we put a couple of those little dances, improvised dances, up on YouTube.
Going on to the YouTube thing, actually, when you're listening to your recordings or watching your videos on YouTube, there's no hesitation in your playing. There's no gaps. There's nothing which, would outwardly show that it's not just a piece you've memorized beforehand. And whilst, I'm not for a minute suggesting you have anything memorized, what's the process of the music appearing in your head to it coming out through your fingers? Because it's just seamless.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And Ben, I'm so really, really happy that we met at this masterclass I was doing at the Royal College of Music, because you were able to see me sit down and not pause and actually play just like I do on YouTube. Because otherwise people might say, oh yeah, sure, yeah. And that's the reason I asked for the 3-note thing, is because it looks so effortless. Well, it is effortless. And as I explained in the class, I believe the gift of instant composition is very analogous to the gift of speech, which all humans share. It's just an extension in a much more complex language. I can go into detail.
Go for it.
If you like.
Detail is good.
The detail is that we all speak a language, and we do this because we have a vocabulary, and we're able to express ourselves because we have a tongue, and it is such a natural process that none of us, I think, out there and in your audience, have to instruct their tongue where to go in their mouth to form a sound when they want to say a word. So the real gift is for a musician to have a wonderfully broad musical vocabulary and have a technique at his instrument that is so natural that his fingers on a keyboard are like the tongue in his mouth.
And in the same way that we learn a language or take vocal classes to improve speech technique, and in piano terms, I guess it's scales and studies that improve technique, how does this improvisational method improve your piano technique? Because, obviously it does.
Well, all of that stuff does. It is true. I came to it from a different way. The odd thing about my pianistic playing is that most people who are self-taught end up with a jazz or pop technique. I have a classical technique. I do have a couple of fingerings that are not traditional.
Yeah, well, that doesn't mean they're wrong, though.
No, actually, they're not as easy as the traditional ones I know. Yeah, and I'll explain that to you after the interview's over because we don't want to bore your listeners out there. But by and large, I just intuited, what you would learn. And in terms of developing scales and developing arpeggios and all of those pianistic things, I didn't consciously teach myself, okay, now I have to learn how to do arpeggios. And when I got that, now I have to learn how to do this. Or now I have to become fluent in this key or that key. When I started off, I was only fluent in 3 keys, C, G, and F. and you've heard me play, at least I now like, everything. My music is very chromatic, and I shift key centers in a flash, and I'm completely fluid. Now, how did I get there? I got there just by making it fun at the piano. If I was weak on scales and runs, I just incorporated runs and scales into everything I was doing. It might be da da dee da dee da dee da. Yeah, you throw them in. And the same thing with arpeggios. I was weak on arpeggios, so I might do dee da 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 dee da da da. Oh, my left hand needed a little more work, so I did a little more, on the left. And that's basically, I incorporated it all. I've never done Czerny exercises. I've never done any of the traditional things. Not that I'm recommending that people don't do that, but there are many ways to get to a certain place.
Well, so basically you incorporate these things into your playing. Aside from the film composition stuff, you're a massively successful film composer. You've written music for about 50 film scores?
50 titles or so, but I've done at least 48 hours of fame episodes. So how many hours of film music I've written, I don't really know. But
and how do you fit your improvisation into your compositional process for film?
Well, I respond. I read a script. I get ideas for themes, and there are 1 or 2 cases where I've had a complete theme in my head before I went to the piano or anything. Sometimes I'm looking at a film in a screening room, a film that I'm going to score, and as I'm watching it, the ideas leap into my head. Sometimes I just play against the picture, and the ideas come very, very, very easily. If I'm under extreme pressure because there's a ridiculous writing schedule, I will rely on orchestrators to do the orchestration for me, and I will sit sometimes just at the piano or at an electronic keyboard and just look at the picture. And I also, by the way, which I did in your class, I can improvise scores to films I've never seen before. So actually, if I actually look at the film beforehand and try 2 or 3 passes, I can usually come up with something pretty good. So that ability can help me. And I actually did a really interesting score in the 80s. For a BBC Showtime production that stars Sir Laurence Olivier and Angela Lansbury called A Talent for Murder, and I recently released the album. It is available, and it was completely improvised on piano, and it took about 7 hours. And if the producers had their way, the score probably would have been done in 2 hours because they bought every first take that I did. But I kept saying, I think we can do better. Yeah. So it took 7 hours. But that is the record.
Well, attention to detail is no bad thing. We're going to have a track from the album right now. It's the end credits music from the soundtrack to A Talent for Murder, with the music composed and performed by William Goldstein. The end credits from William Goldstein's soundtrack to A Talent for Murder was just up there before, and today on the Classical Cafe we've been listening to what happened when I met up with Bill himself for brunch last week. We're going to hear another one of his tracks right now, and I asked him how his style of writing and playing has changed over the years.
Well, it's very interesting to me how it has changed. I am a founding director of the California State Summer School for the Arts, which is a program for talented high school students, not only in California, but we have people coming from around the world. And the director of the school for many years, a man who sadly passed away a few years ago named Rob Jaffe, encouraged me at one point to start working with dancers. He says, we have a really talented dancer who's a graduate of Cal Arts, and how would you feel about, coming in and improvising a dance or ballet with her? We'll invite the dance students as well as the music students. Never tried it before, but I said, sure, absolutely. So I met this very, very talented dancer, a Chinese woman named Qi Zhang, who was trained in classical and Chinese and all kinds of dance. And there are a couple of little YouTube clips of she and I working together. But I met her, and she was really frightened. Everybody's frightened before they do this. So she came down to my home, and just we tried a little something just to make sure that she was comfortable. And I said, let's not do any more. Let's just leave it spontaneous. And then we did the class, and the class was magical. And then we got together and recorded a few of these things. And I find that when I'm working with dancers, because I've now worked with a lot of dancers, whoever I'm working with, the music is different because they are different, and it's a different dynamic. Then I started doing musical conversations with singers, just like we're doing now, except we'd be singing to each other. And there are a couple of those on YouTube. And I did a fabulous 14-minute one last summer at the same transatlantic festival I mentioned earlier in Poznan, Poland, with a Polish jazz singer who was terrified. She said, I've never done this. I don't know if I can do this. And she did really, really, really well, and I invite your listeners to take a look there. And then when I start working with musicians, well, obviously in jazz, when different jazz musicians are working together, they obviously influence each other greatly, and it's the same thing with me. So in addition to 2 solo piano albums I have there, the first one that came out in 99 was called First Impressions, and then there's Isn't It Romantic that was released 1 year ago. And then my latest improvisational album is called In the Moment, and that I did with a longtime friend who is a composer and wonderful saxophonist named James D. Pasquale. And Jim and I started working on this at his suggestion. He wanted to try it. I was very skeptical whether we could do something, but it was just phenomenal. And the most phenomenal thing about In the Moment is how compositional it sounds, how the ideas that are tossed back and forth between the two of us into compositions. Now, probably because we're both composers and we think compositionally, but it's not the kind of meandering or just, riffing, for 16 bars or 32 bars and coming back to a tune. This is really developing a composition. It's quite unique, and I think if you have some jazz listeners out there, they'll really appreciate it. And I'd like to think that the bottom line is it's not important how it was created. It's just that the music itself communicates and has some positive energy to it and positive feeling upon the listener.
Cool. We're going to have a go with one of these instant compositions right now. It's called Snowflakes from the album In the Moment. Snowflakes by William Goldstein and James de Pasquale from the album In the Moment. It's a really wonderfully intimate recording, that, isn't it? It's just incredible. You can hear the rasp of the saxophone. You can hear every little detail. It's like you're in the room. And more than just in the room, in fact, it's like you're in the end of the saxophone.
Classical Cafe with Ben MacDougall
on BBC Radio Cumbria.
So if you've just recently joined us today on the Classical Cafe and BBC Radio Cumbria, then you won't know that so far today we've been listening to the wise words of pianist, film composer and instant composer William Goldstein. A little earlier on he was talking about how his style has changed over the years, and I figured that there must be some great stories there.
Well, I've had an extraordinarily strange career, from being the one person in the United States Army during the Vietnam War whose job was just to write music, to being discovered by a man named Berry Gordy, who founded Motown Records and discovered Michael Jackson and Diana Ross and Smokey Robinson and discovered William Goldstein in the late 70s. And that's the reason I came out to Los Angeles. And Motown, I had done one movie before, but Motown got me into doing movies in a very big way. And I was a disco artist in the 70s. And the really shocking thing about my Motown days in the 70s is that the younger generation discovered me in 2008, put some of my old records on YouTube, and in 2009, Motown released the Best of William Goldstein, 85-minute collection of my work during the late 70s. So those are pretty, really odd things. I think the first performance of my trombone concerto, Colloquy, both in Washington at an outdoor concert at the infamous Watergate, and then at Carnegie Hall in New York a few weeks later. Very special stuff. I became the first person in the world to record a musical score on a computer in 1985. There's a clip on YouTube from the American television show Entertainment Tonight, which outlines that, and CBS Masterworks released that score called Oceanscape, which has also been recently re-released. And I pioneered the way almost every composer doing film works today. So I mean, I don't know. I'd like to think the best is yet to come.
And we've got one more track lined up from Bill today. It's from the instant compositional album, Isn't It Romantic? So before I go ahead and press play, I wanted to know if there's anything that he wanted to add.
There is one thing that's worth relating, in that I have found that when I do these musical portraits, as I did in, well, First Impression, there were some musical portraits, but Isn't It Romantic is all musical portraits, that the pieces that came out from the three notes that people picked and were created while they're there touched each of these people in such a personal way. They felt it was that there's something mystical and very spiritual in this sort of thing.
And you'd somehow gathered that essence within the piece.
Well, I don't know how it happens, and I only know it because it's related to me by the people that are there when I'm creating this, something that I'm not consciously aware of.
Wow, well, this track from the album, Isn't It Romantic, is called Far East Dreams by William Goldstein. And don't forget, there's no music written down here at all. This is just coming straight from his head, through his fingers, and out to the piano. It's incredible.